Welcome to Shaftesbury Abbey. This magnificent structure, which dominated the hilltop, was the result of centuries of dedication.
The abbey was one of the first monastic institutions,
Dedicated to women alone in all of England, holding vast lands across the southwest and always connected to royalty. And yet, what you see in the Abbey Gardens and Museum is all that survived the destruction of Henry VIII's Reformation.
I'm Fraser Guard, a history student at the University of Bristol. Archaeological excavations and surveys have increased our understanding of how the abbey would have looked in its heyday. Using 16th century surveys, medieval seals, and archaeological evidence, I reconstructed the abbey using Minecraft, a game about building with blocks. I also used a modification called Conquest Reforged to make it look more realistic. Unfortunately, the blockiness of the game limits the realism of the reconstruction. But before we look at the layout, what was the significance of Shaftesbury Abbey? The abbey was established by King Alfred the Great in 888 AD, following his victory in battle against the Vikings at Edington. Perhaps as a token of gratitude to God, Alfred put his daughter in charge of the abbey, making it the first major monastic house built for women and led by women in all of England, with uniquely generous royal patronage.
The alleged remains of St. Edward the Martyr were buried near the altar of the Abbey Church in 987. A cult grew around the declared saint, and the alleged miracles performed at his tomb attracted pilgrims from far and wide, granting the abbey commercial and political benefits. The Abbess of Shaftesbury was one of the most powerful women in medieval England.
The Norman conquest set in motion a revolution in English church architecture, and Shaftesbury was no exception. By the 12th century, the Saxon church was gone, replaced with a new Norman Romanesque structure. This building would survive almost entirely unchanged for the duration of the abbey's life, although there were some small extensions made in the later Middle Ages. The abbey's financial situation was worsened by the Black Death in 1349, a plague that wiped out around half of England's population. Nevertheless, Shaftesbury Abbey continued to reap in wealth from the many farms in its possession, as well as the commercial market it held in the town and the pilgrims that St. Edward the Martyr attracted.
Nothing could save it from Henry VIII's Reformation, however. Already on the decline, the nunnery was among the last to be dissolved in 1539, which made it the longest surviving in England. Within a mere 35 years, the entire abbey complex had been laid low to the ground, its materials repurposed in buildings in the surrounding area. The site was occasionally developed over the next 4 centuries, and partial excavations took place in the early 19th and 20th centuries. The site was extensively excavated and opened to the public as a museum and garden. Further excavations and surveys took place in 2019 as part of a community project, and it is these that have enabled us to reconstruct with more accuracy how the Abbey complex may have looked. At its most developed at the end of the 15th century, the Abbey complex would have been a sight to behold and incorporated much of the west side of Shaftesbury. It was a town within a town, dominated by the Norman Romanesque church, a mighty structure that would have dazzled travellers for miles around with its clean whitewashed walls. The Romanesque style was characterised by round-headed arches, which were not as strong as the pointed arches of later Gothic architectural styles. As a result of this, the walls were thick and the windows small. It would have been a dark place, brightened slightly by the gaudy paintings of Christian saints and stories that covered its inner walls. The east end of the church, which was used exclusively by the nuns for prayer and services, saw numerous additions in the 14th and 15th centuries, constructed in the Gothic style of architecture. This development allowed bigger windows and thinner walls, brightening the interior like never before. Flanking the abbey church to the north was the cloister. This quadrangular walkway provided access to essential buildings for the nuns, including the dormitory, where they slept, the refectory, where they dined, and the chapter house, where they discussed the business of the abbey. North of the cloister was the Church of the Holy Trinity. This was the parish church for the common folk, whilst the abbey church was reserved for the nuns. The church was rebuilt on the original site in the 19th century, and you can still see this today. Flanking Binport, once the main street of Shaftesbury, would have been a wall of monastic buildings of various purposes. From 16th century surveys of the site, we know what some of these buildings were, although their precise location is difficult to be certain about. There were stables, a bakehouse, a star chamber, likely used as a court, a treasury, larder houses, and granaries. Contrary to the present day, where you will have entered the museum from Park Walk to the south, you would enter the Abbey complex from this north side, through the main gatehouse, down what is now Abbey Walk. As you walked down this road, you would be flanked by chambers and lodgings on your left, and workshops on your right, including kitchens, brewers, and malt houses, which were essential to maintaining the Abbey's day-to-day functioning. It would only be as you passed the abbess's house that the mighty Abbey church would first come into view. To the south of the Abbey church lay the herb garden, perhaps the most private part of the Abbey. Plants grown here would have been used in the infirmary nearby for curing illnesses and healing wounds. This is essentially where you would be standing here today.
On the other side of Park Walk, the Abbey's vineyards may have run along the hillside. Vineyards were more common in England than they are today, due to the warmer climate at the time, allowing for wine to be produced locally. This may have made up a significant part of the Abbey's economy, and from down here, it's easier to appreciate just how impressive the Abbey would have been.
For travellers going to Shaftesbury up Gold Hill, this huge, dazzling white structure would have dominated over them, a reminder as to who was in charge here. In fact, this mighty wall that you see flanking the houses on this iconic street was actually the boundary wall of the medieval Abbey precinct.
This vast and wonderful place, where hundreds of people lived, worked, and died, is now almost entirely lost to the mists of time. Thankfully, the Abbey Gardens, as peaceful today as they were in the Middle Ages, are now open to the public. Take your time to read more about this magnificent place in the museum, and then take the opportunity to step where so many have stood before you on the site of the Abbey Church itself. Come back again and check our website as we further develop our understanding and reconstruction of this wonderful abbey.